Welcome to the Tenant Podcast. I'm Todd Pearson, here with my friend and partner and co-host extraordinaire, Wes Brown.
Hey, I'm that co-host extraordinaire again. That's great. I love that badge. Thank you. I appreciate that. Hey, I'm glad to see you. I'm excited about tonight. This is going to be a fun conversation. And I just read an article. Did you see the article that Lorenzo Chavez shared about Lee Krasner?
You know what? I saw that come across my feed, but I did not read the article. Did you?
Yeah, I read the article. It was a wonderful piece. People that don't know, she was Jackson Pollock's wife. Not necessarily put her career on pause for him, but put her career on pause for him. And she has some beautiful work that she did, an abstract expressionist, just like her husband. So anyway, it was really interesting, once he died, how her career went and how she now is really her awareness as a woman artist has exploded. In fact, what I thought was really interesting is Guggenheim, I think it was in 1948, was having a retrospective of women artists, and she refused to be in it. And she went by Lee, even though her name was Lena. Interesting piece. So if you don't know much about her, our listeners should go out and read. It's really interesting. So,
you know what? I saved that in my feed, and what I'll do is I'll find that article. I was saving it so I could read it later, and I'll post it up on the Tenant Podcast page for people that are interested.
Yeah.
Cool. I'm glad you brought that up, man.
Yeah. Well, I'm excited about tonight. This is going to be fun.
It is going to be fun. It's a new week and a new episode, but before we talk about art, I want to acknowledge our media sponsor, New Magazine. That's NUE. New recently put out the winter issue of New Denver. You can find the link to the issue on the Tenant Facebook page, along with the link to their new 2021 arts issue. Or if you have an Instagram, you can follow New National Edition at new_magazine and the Denver edition at new_Denver_magazine. And coming up in April, New Denver is putting on Weekend of the Arts. This event will be happening the evening of Friday, April 23rd through Sunday, the 25th. This will be happening at the historic Zhang building on Platt Street here in Denver, and will be home to New Space pop-up gallery. COVID guidelines at the time of the event will be followed. And as we get more details for this event, we will share them with you on the podcast and our Facebook page. So please stay tuned. All right. Time to talk about art. Our guest this week is a phenomenal artist and leader that is doing wonderful work in the Denver community. Her name is Adri Norris, and we are honored that she is willing to spend some time with us this week. Adri, how are you?
I'm doing great, thanks. How are you doing?
I'm doing excellent. You are currently an artist in residence at Redline, correct?
Yes, I am. I've been here since November.
Right on. How's that going for you?
It's going really well. The very cool thing about Redline is that they really wanted to make sure they had a diverse collection of artists. And so we've got folks from, abstract artists to portrait artists like myself to, audio artists to printmakers. So it was like a mixed bag. And so we all get to sort of look at one another's work and cross-pollinate ideas and all kinds of stuff. It's amazing.
That's really cool. I bet it's really inspirational.
Absolutely, yeah. And in addition to the exhibits that come through, so the second one is being put up right now, at least second since I've been here. So it's like all photography, and I'm just like fascinated by all the different styles and formats and methodologies that folks have employed.
Have you done a residence before?
No, this is my very first residence.
That's really cool. I'll be curious. And how long does this go for?
This is a 2-year residency. So I'm here for a bit.
Nice. Sweet. Did you have a studio space before you got this residency, or were you just working out of your home?
Immediately before this residency, I was working from my home, but I have had studio space in the last 3 to 4 years. So I was living in Lyons for a tiny stretch of time and had a studio in Boulder as a result. And then I was at Helicon Galleries and Studios before they closed down. This was 2018 was probably when I left. So, but then I've been working from home in the meantime.
Is it nice to have a studio space again where you just go and that's like your workspace?
Yes, absolutely. First off, I leave the house So it's like going to the office, and so there's a very distinct difference between work time and not work time. But also, it's a much larger space than I have available in my home. And so it gives me a lot more opportunity to experiment with different methodologies.
That's so cool. You are not originally from Denver. Can you?
No, I'm not originally from the U.S.
Tell our listeners where you were born.
I was born in Barbados. I left there when I was 5 years old, hence the complete lack of accent. And lived in New York for a stretch of time in the 80s, and in New Mexico for the remainder of my pre-adolescent through, early adulthood years.
Where in New Mexico did you live?
If you heard of Las Vegas, New Mexico?
Yeah.
Okay, so just outside of Las Vegas, New Mexico, there's a very tiny town called Montezuma, New Mexico, which consists of about a post office, an international boarding school, and some scattered houses in the mountains.
That's awesome.
So how do you go from New York to Montezuma, New Mexico?
So this is actually, it's an immigration story. And it actually has a lot to do with the fact that the policies that were put in place in the early 80s affected my family directly. So my mom was able to come over to the US, and because we had family here, she had a green card, all of those things. The paperwork was more or less streamlined. But by the time my dad went to come over, everything was much more difficult. So 85 was when we got here. Reagan had been in office for quite some time, which means anything that he implemented had a chance to be put into place and to stick. So it was actually a few years before my dad was able to come over to the US. He had been a French teacher in Barbados forever. But when he got here, he wasn't actually able to find a job teaching French for a good chunk of time. And so finally heard about an opportunity in Montezuma, New Mexico at that international boarding school. And that was where he actually got to, do the thing that he had been training for / had been doing for, the vast majority of his life. Eventually in 92, the rest of the family moved over to join him. So that's how we ended up in Montezuma.
Interesting. Did you enjoy living there?
Oh, yeah. No, especially after New York, where, you got to keep an eye out for cars when you go to play. And all of a sudden I've got 2 soccer fields in my front yard, a mountain in my backyard, a stream off to the side, and some hot springs. Dude, it was amazing.
That is a Oh, go ahead, Wes.
Oh, I was going to say, isn't this the boarding school we've talked about before?
Yeah, so I spent time in Las Vegas. I really love that town. And if you've never traveled to northern New Mexico, do yourself a favor. It's just stunningly beautiful. Yeah. And get off the highway. If you just see Las Vegas from the highway, you have zero appreciation for what it truly is. It's a beautiful little town with a lot to offer. It's got an arts community there. I think it's the oldest town on the Santa Fe Trail. It's got a beautiful old town square, some great restaurants. And then the school that you were talking about, it's called the Collegiate School, right?
No, it's the United World College. So,
United World College. I don't know why I got collegiate.
No worries. Once upon a time, it was called the Arm & Hammer United World College. But, then they found out about his affiliations with some not so desirable things. And so they changed it to UWC USA, so United World College of the United States. And as part of the family of schools, I think there are 14 around the world now. So, yeah.
And it's crazy that this place is out. I mean, essentially, it looks like in the middle of nowhere. It looks like Hogwarts, kind of. And that was my perception. It's got some wonderful hot springs, which you mentioned that I've soaked in right along the highway. And people from all over, dignitaries and people from all over the world send their kids there, I guess, to get educated. So it's interesting that you have that connection there.
And I think this is like the 3rd time we've talked about this place on the podcast, because
that's crazy.
Yeah. It's come up. I think Lorenzo Chavez, right? Didn't we mention it then? Or maybe it was a different one. Anyway, it's like, now I know this place for sure. And so you mentioned, I'm like, I bet you that's that place that we've talked about. So that is so cool. That is so cool.
Yeah. And it's remote by design. So when they first were putting the school together, in fact, the vast majority of the schools are not in major cities. They're actually outside. because they want the student body to actually get a chance to know one another. And they felt that if it was in, a major municipality, that folks would be more interested in going out and shopping and partying and all the other things that kids like to do when they're near a big city. When there's nothing else to do, you have to talk to each other.
Yeah. It's funny how that is.
So because your father was teaching there, did you end up going to school there as well?
I did, actually. So I was class of 2000, graduated then.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
It blows my mind that I wasn't able to remember the name of that school, because I've been there by a couple times. And like I said, I've soaked in that hot springs, and then I just love Las Vegas, New Mexico. I think it's a gem. It's a hidden gem. But if you're driving by the highway, you might think, oh my God, what is that place? But
it's deceptively, it's deceptive that way.
Mm-hmm.
How many years were you there before you graduated?
I was there for 8 years. So we got there in 92. And then by the time I graduated from the World College, it was 2000. And then from there, I joined the military, because why not?
And what made you decide to join the military after graduation?
Honestly, I felt as if I'd been taking my own choices away. And so to roll back a little bit, when I was in school in New York, I had been enrolled in the gifted program, and everything was designed to be really challenging for me. But when I got to Las Vegas, there wasn't a gifted program. And so, my teachers did the best they could. I was always a grade ahead, like doing self-study in math when I was in middle school. And then, by the time I hit high school, I just kind of developed bad habits. I realized pretty early on that I would just go to class, take notes, do enough homework, never study, and pass tests and do well. And so that was what I thought school was. But by the time I got to the World College and realized that much more was expected of me, it was a difficult shift, and I didn't do it completely. There was a checking out of sorts. And I actually didn't start at the World College in Las Vegas or in Montezuma. I actually started one in Italy, which was like a whole other thing, because now I'm far away from home, so I don't have that reinforcement, because my mom was definitely the enforcer in that, in the academic realm. I was experiencing challenge and struggle that I didn't know how to handle. There was certain messaging that I, in hindsight, recognize as being less than good for me that I was receiving from faculty and staff. And so I was like, well, I'm just going to play soccer then. And so I was recruited for a local team, and I just, let that be my focus.
Wow. So the Italy experience was a mixed bag of things?
Essentially, yeah, it was a mixed bag. It was amazing. It was amazing to have left the country, to be an artist, because I definitely took art classes while I was there, and to travel the way that we did. I was taking a class called World Cultures, and it was basically looking at the different cultures in the world through their artworks. We had field trips where we went to Venice, we went to Milan, we went to Vienna, and we checked out, the different churches and museums and things of that nature. And so to be in a place that, I'd seen in books, and to look at this architecture and know how old it was and how long it was still standing, and the fact that it's still actively being used, especially coming from a country where we tend to tear our old things down, was thoroughly impressing and enthralling to me. And so, I would say the bulk of my education while I was in Italy was outside of classroom situations. In class was a whole other ballgame. I just really felt overwhelmed, unprepared, and isolated in some ways.
Overwhelmed by the curriculum that was being taught?
Partially. The program that we do is the International Baccalaureate, the IB program. And the way it's set up is that you have 6 classes that you're taking. 3 of them are at what they call the higher level, and then 3 at the standard level. So the higher level classes, imagine AP class on steroids. It's super incredibly difficult work. And so, there's a lot of information to retain. There's a lot of stuff that you had to study on your own. My tendency to not do homework was definitely me shooting myself in the foot because I didn't recognize that I would be tested on things that we read outside of class, but never touched inside of class. Things of that nature. Yeah, I would say that, in a lot of ways, the American school system did not prepare me for the IB program, or at least the portions of the school system that I had been through in my latter years in high school.
Yeah.
And then you said you got mixed messages from faculty.
Yeah, faculty and staff. The headmaster and really a lot of the teachers were British. And as much as we like to think that, the Brits are different from us, we are of them. And so, I'd definitely been called lazy and, just usual kind of racial stereotypes. And then I remember there was this lady, a maid who worked in our dorm. And, I would encounter her in our day room while I'm getting snacks or whatever. And for some reason, her favorite thing to say to me, she didn't speak any English at all, was, "No sai niente, Adrienne. You don't know anything, Adrienne." She would say this to me almost every time I saw her. And at the time, I took it as, oh, well, my Italian is bad. I haven't learned enough words yet. But it's such a blanket phrase. She wasn't being specific, right? And so, yeah, that's one of those things that just kind of sticks a little bit.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I'm sure it had a trickle around effect to other things I was doing.
Sure.
And imagine, the first couple times you hear that, you're like, what's up with this lady? And you kind of brush it off. But then after a while, you realize that she was being racist, right?
Yeah. And I don't even know if I took it in as such then. I was 17 years old. Now I'm 41. So with the perspective of hindsight and the additional knowledge that I've amassed, because I had grown up with this notion of international understanding and togetherness. I'd been in the World College realm without actually being a student since I was 12 years old. And so it didn't occur to me that that was something that would happen there.
Right.
And I guess I always think that Europe is more progressive than the United States. So I guess it's not surprising, but at the same time, I am surprised. I just think that when I think of Europe and European countries, that, like I said, that they're more progressive in their thought and that racism isn't prevalent. But racism, I guess, exists everywhere, right?
Yeah, no, a friend of mine, a girl from Sudan, or sorry, she was from Sudan. Darker complected than me. We were walking in a group past some sort of rally that was taking place. And, with my Italian being as shaky as it was, and by that to mean not very existent, I didn't exactly know what the rally was about. But I do remember that we were passing by this crowd and a woman in the crowd spat on my friend who was standing right next to me. So, we saw it outright.
Obviously, Wes and I check all the boxes for white male, middle-aged guys, as far as white privilege is concerned. Right. And I think Wes and I have a lot of these conversations as far as the whole racism thing and where our country is and where it's headed, and if it's ever going to change. As a 17-year-old girl, how does that make you feel when people act like this? I can't imagine.
That's a loaded question.
Well,
this might be where I say pass. Yeah. It's a shake to your worldview. When you're raised told you can do anything and be anyone, and then you have the world tell you you can't. It's hard to know what to do with. And so there's that piece of you that's like, well, maybe if I don't focus on this and accentuate the positive, as it were, then I'll be able to live my life in a way that is, better, easier, whatever you want to call it, while simultaneously it's still happening. You can't ignore that a thing is happening. And I think the force of that denial is in itself painful. And the force of that denial is in itself damaging.
And, and it's, the last 4 years, it's even, well, there's a couple things. It's in our face a lot, which makes us more conscious of it, which is always good. But it's a sad realization, even for me, to see that, we haven't gotten as far as I thought we did. And it's tough. It's tough. And
I have a sense the last 4 years is a bigger blow to you than it was to me.
Well, then that could be, because it's easy for me as a 59-year-old white male to kind of bury my head in the sand and live on my life, because it doesn't impact me the same way it impacts you. But like I said, it's just been, to see rallies in Charlottesville, to see that happen, it just makes me like sick to my stomach. And it's just, I'm beside myself and I don't even know what to do. And, we've had conversations like on this podcast or about the podcast is like, even how much do we say, if you don't say anything, and then are you complicit? And, it's a struggle. It's something that I struggle with. So the benefit of, these things being in my face, it forces me to think about it, which is, like I said, that's a good thing and an opportunity to grow even, so, and I've been more aware of things that I've said in the past. When I was in the military, very, very conservative. And I walked, and now I walk and think, holy crap, I'm glad I've changed my mindset, but it's hard for me to wrap around my head. That's probably very close to not what I felt, because I would have never, here we go, would never consider myself a racist, but, Well,
I'm glad you were willing to share that with us. I think it's important that we have these kind of conversations. And I think the one thing that is a disconnect for white people is that they don't have these conversations. And maybe you have them more so with other white people, but I think it's important that there's a dialogue so that people can understand. Like Wes says, I think because it doesn't impact them directly, they just brush it off, right? And it doesn't even get thought about. So I think for us to change, it's important that we have the conversation and, and talk about how it makes people feel and what it does to people, because it's incredibly detrimental. And, then it carries on from generation to generation.
Yeah. I'm reading a book right now. I'm actually at the very end of it, called The Sum of Us by Heather McGhee. And highly recommend everybody read it at this stage. And basically her premise, she started off as kind of like a social justice economist. I don't know the exact title, but basically, looking into economic factors behind social and systematic inequality and questioning, what are the root causes of these things? And so she was, in that kind of middle of the road. We're unequal because of greed, and there's inequality because of, choices that corporate or government interests are making in order to maintain the status quo for themselves, for their own benefit. But in looking at it deeper, she found that there was absolutely a racialized reason behind a lot of the systemic inequality that we are experiencing. And that the way in which these choices are being made to the detriment of people of color is simultaneously to the detriment of white people. And so, a vast majority, like people of color get hit the hardest by racist decisions that are made by government and corporations, but white people are hit more broadly by it as well. And so the overall notion is that there is a damage that is being caused to the majority population, white folks in the United States, by the continued racism that is taking place in this country. So I say this because anytime I have conversations with white folks about race, there is a tendency to look at it as a people of color problem, and it's not. We didn't do this to us. We're not
right.
And in a lot of ways, it is white society doing it to it themselves. And so that is something to consider when having these conversations, that it's not just us that are being damaged. Everyone's being damaged in so many ways. I mean, even if you roll back to the extent of the forced assimilation in this country, right? You look at, we think about, Native Americans having gone through the boarding schools. That's a form of forced assimilation. We think about, Latin American people being told not to speak their languages at home. That's a form of forced assimilation. But those are people who have darker skin. People with lighter skin also underwent varying forms of forced assimilation. And so if you were Italian, if you were Polish, if you were German, you also lost your language. You also lost your culture. And so not seeing yourselves in that racialized conversation is doing every last one of us a disservice.
That was well said. That was well said. Yeah.
And it sounds like a really interesting book, and yeah, I've never thought about it that way, other than the fact that I know that in the end, if we continue down this path and we continue to be divided as the human race, we're not going to get out of here in one piece, right? Intact. In the end, we're all going to pay for it. Yeah. So I guess in some ways I've thought about it, but the way that you were able to express it, I think that was right on.
Yeah, it's funny that you should mention that. So the other book that I'm reading, because The Sum of Us is my daytime reading. It's the intellectual reading. And then I have my, more brain candy-ish, though still heavy book. I'm reading Octavia Butler's Lilith's Brood. So Octavia Butler was pretty much the preeminent, and if you were to name names, the only one that comes to mind, Black female science fiction novelists in the United States. And this book, Lilith's Brood, is about kind of a post-apocalyptic future in which the human race has killed itself off because of mutually assured destruction. So it was written just at the tail end of the Cold War. And so we were still kind of in that space of nuclear, that potential for a nuclear future for us. And so in the book, we've already done it, destroyed the planet, the whole nine. But this race of aliens has kind of passed by just in time to sort of pick up some survivors and repair their bodies, and 250 years later decide to reconstitute them back onto the planet Earth, but only if our genes are mixed with their own. The reason being that humans have a genetic flaw, and it's in our DNA, and we can't seem to get rid of it, and we can't overcome it, and it will cause our mutual destruction. And that is the flaw of the combination of intelligence and the belief in hierarchy. Without the hierarchy in particular, there is no way we will survive. And that is almost exactly the thing that Heather McGee is talking about in her book as well. This reliance on somebody has to be worse off than somebody else is the thing that is assuring our destruction right now. It's the way that racist propaganda is able to survive and proliferate, because everybody, no matter how badly off they are, needs somebody to be better than. And so they will make decisions against their own best interest in order to maintain that hierarchy.
Wow. It's interesting that with everything that's gone on, we can't seem to see ourselves out of this. Are you hopeful for the future? Do you think that we can, as humans, get past the whole idea of this hierarchy, the whole idea of racism, and see each other as equals, no matter what our skin color is, our gender, whatever it may be, the religion we practice? Do you think we can get to that point?
I want to say yes, but I can't. In this sense, I'm almost inclined to agree with Octavia Butler. Because I was listening to a completely different podcast. I listen to podcasts all the time. And they were talking about how, there's that social aspect, the socialism of the Scandinavian countries, right? That's what we always hold up as the ideal. They have their healthcare taken care of. They have their education taken care of. They have all of these things that, are just built into the social system. And so, individuals don't have to deal with that like they do here. But they're also incredibly homogenous societies. And, they developed that way. Though the argument was that, they were able to develop their empathy in this homogenous society. And so, there are immigrants to those countries who are dark-skinned. I know that there's an African population in the Netherlands, things of that nature, and they do get to benefit from those social contracts. I don't know to what extent they experience racism because I've not spent any time there. It is my hope that, they have the same sense of equality as do, all the other members of that society. But I don't know. As far as I'm concerned, there's not a single place in this entire world that hasn't been colonized or touched by colonialism in some way, shape, or form. And so once you have it in you to treat anyone badly, then it's just so much easier to continue justifying that behavior. And that's the problem that we have here. And so as hopeful as I would like to be, there's just much too long a history of treating people badly. And I don't know how to overcome that without a drastic shift in mentality. And I don't know how a drastic universal shift in mentality takes place because I've never seen it.
Right. Yeah.
Do you see a different mentality in like the younger generations? Because I know that you do workshops and you work with kids and do some mentoring and that sort of thing. Do you see any kind of a change in their mindset, do you think?
It depends. Every school is different. Every school is its own ecosystem. And so I've been in very diverse schools and I've been in very homogenous schools. And, kids are kids. And they take in their information from their parents and their homes. They take information in from the schools. They take information in from media. And they emulate and regurgitate that which they have taken in. And so, yes, with regard to, like, say, queerness, there's definitely a significantly more openness with regard to acceptance and things of that nature. And there's still bullying, and cyberbullying is a major problem because all these kids are connected in, via the internet and via their phone services and things of that nature. And so the fact that bullying exists means the fact that other, hierarchical forms of thinking also exist. And so until such a time as they don't get those inputs, and therefore don't have those outputs. Again, I don't really know how we could get to the place where it goes away.
Right. Yeah.
So do you think, like Octavia Butler, do you think that this is something that's just embedded in human DNA? Or do you think it's more the construct or the passing down from generation, this hate, this thought of hate that's instilled in kids, that's a learned thing?
Do you believe in epigenetics at all? Then
I don't even know what that is. So what's epigenetics? I'm not that smart, so you gotta bear with me, Adri.
So epigenetics is the notion that the things that happen to your ancestors get stored in their DNA and therefore get passed on to you. So the most common examples are people who have experienced starvation, right? So folks who lived through World War II, say in France, when those people had children, the amount of cortisol that they had experienced in life, and especially if they conceived while they were at high levels of cortisol, had an effect on the temperaments of the children, in addition to, if folks experience like starvation. So I'm thinking about the French in particular. France had a full-on famine during World War II. And so the children who were born afterwards were more likely to be more obese because when you've been given the cues before birth that, hey, there's not enough food here, then your body is already automatically programmed to store it. So imagine now 400 plus years of epigenetic information saying that either one group is better than the other, or one group has to live in fear because we always have.
It's and that's connected to the term I've heard is historical trauma, where if you're under a very stressful situation and, whether it's your property being confiscated by invading people or whatever, that this has a continued. Native Americans use that term a lot as far as historical trauma and trying to get beyond that. And obesity in that population can be pretty significant as well. And so I think it totally makes sense, because all that stuff is, all this chemical, we're just raging chemicals in our body, and they're going to have some impact on, internal organs or the way our systems work. So that makes a lot of sense, I think.
I've heard people talk about the whole PTSD thing handed down, especially with Indigenous and Native American people in the Black community, I'm sure as well, that being passed down from generation to generation. And that makes sense, that this thing just gets carried on and passed on. I had a friend, a mentor, Emmanuel Trujillo, who was Apache. And his thought was, though, that God hardwires you with everything that you need, and that every human being, even if it's, you're taught racism, there's racism in the house and it's passed on from generation. He still believed that the way that we're hardwired, that every human being knows right from wrong. What do you think of that concept or that premise?
So I watched this documentary on babies, and it was really fascinating. They wanted to see what babies' reactions were to this notion of someone being on my team. And so they did this experiment where they had small children. So they were under 18 months of age. So, old enough to be able to signal things, but young enough to still be nonverbal. And, they were shown 2 stuffed animals, right? And then they were shown like foods, and it was established which food the baby liked, right? So the baby super liked the cheesy crackers, not into broccoli. So stuffed animal A is shown to be very interested in the cheesy crackers. Stuffed animal B is shown to be very interested in the broccoli. And then a scenario was set up in which one of the 2 stuffed animals was playing a game with a different stuffed animal, a third one. And during the course of the game, a whole other creature comes in and takes the ball away, right? So they're rolling a ball back and forth and being very cooperative, and then somebody else comes and takes the ball. At the end of the experiment, the babies were shown the stuffed animal that took the ball and their stuffed animal, the one that was playing the game. If the one that was playing the game was on the baby's team, like the cheesy crackers, then the baby wanted to give a big hug to the one that lost the ball. If the one that was playing the game was the one that was into the broccoli, then the baby was very interested in the stuffed animal that took the ball. And so it's in us. It's my point.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's in us, but do you think that we can decipher even when we do bad things? Don't you think that you kind of know, like deep down inside, that, hey, that wasn't right, even though you've been taught this thing? Don't you think that people, or do you?
I think go ahead.
If you've only ever known the lessons of your parents and the people around you, when you're confronted with something that is contrary, like, your first instinct is to reject the contrary notion because it goes against the thing you know so well.
I agree with that. I think you can be raised and not truly know the difference between, or do the wrong thing consistently and think you're right. I think if it was so clear that we knew right and wrong from the get-go, then we wouldn't have some of the things that we have. But there's always people that are just bad, They're going to do bad things just because that's the way they're wired, because they're, they don't have any empathy. They're, that kind of
and they were raised in a really.
Say that again.
You mean the psychopaths and the sociopaths?
Yeah. So,
well, I mean, you mentioned before, Wes, that in the military, there was some things that, at least now you felt like that wouldn't fly in your psyche and the way that you present yourself. At the time, did you feel like maybe that wasn't a good thing? I mean, did you recognize that?
Well, what comes to mind is more like, you're thinking you're funny and you're saying things that are insensitive and thinking that they're part of the joke. They're part of it, not a joke but they're part of it. But they, and then not realizing that, they laughed, but they may not have, inside they may have been, pissed or dying, and not knowing, without going into a big, long detail. But, so there's that, there's that whole, the group thing. You think you're part of the group, or you have to do things that even, okay, I'll laugh at his joke because he's my superior and he's trying to be funny, and I'll give him the benefit of the doubt. He's not being malicious about it. But a more mature me would have just not even made the joke. It's, I'm a subject of being raised in the 60s and 70s, where things could be said and we all laughed it off, but you just think it was a joke, and same with jokes about women, it's the same thing. He's like, well, I was just joking. How can you be mad about that? Well, you got to sit in their shoes. And anyway, the more I talk, the deeper the hole is. So I'm trying not to dig myself a big hole.
But at that time, I mean, you recognize it now, but at the time you still know that it's not cool, right?
Well, I don't know. Cause everybody's laughing, right?
You're laughing but you want to fit in at the same time. But at the same time, you're like, I'm not sure that that's cool.
Yeah.
I think there's a question there. And I guess that's where I was going with this whole thing. And we've gone down this huge rabbit hole now.
Like way too deep.
but I think it's
she's going to start regretting she even agreed to come on to this, because we're not talking about art.
She can't bail on us because she's the smartest person here
in the room, in the Zoom room. That could be. Anyway,
thank you for discussing some of these ideas and definitely give us some things to chew on as far as some books that you've been reading. We always enjoy hearing from other artists and hear about what they're reading, what they're studying, what they're doing. I'm going to interrupt real quick. Okay.
How comfortable are you with this past conversation? Have you been fine? Because we obviously going down a path that you weren't anticipating necessarily.
Well, I hadn't even anticipated this. So.
Well, I know. That's why I'm saying, and a lot of stuff and great stuff I think was unpacked here, but I want you to tell me how comfortable you've been. And if I hope I didn't make you feel uncomfortable with some of the things I said or whatever, but. It
is a comfortable discomfort in the sense that I have grown accustomed to having these conversations, and this is the discomfort that comes with these conversations.
Okay.
But for us to move forward, we have to have these difficult conversations, right? Okay. Like,
I just want to know that she's fine with, me editing out. I'm going to edit out some of this, I'm going to edit out this part. I just don't want you to, I don't want this conversation to kind of like, if you're like, why are we talking about this? I'm fine with that. We can edit it down however you want. I just want to make sure you as the guest are fine. Mm-hmm. And
I've been very intentional about having these conversations for quite some time now.
Okay.
And I feel that some of the insights that I revealed here are insights that I've been putting on my social media page.
Okay.
Things that I've been very intentional about talking about. And this is part of my overall work, right? So there's artwork that I do, which begins the conversation, which gets me into this room.
Right.
And then, there is this aspect of it as well. So this is all things that I discuss with my work. I discuss in conjunction with my work. But also, as a human who has found herself in an activism space.
Okay. I feel better now, because the last thing I want to do is on Thursday when I release this, second guess myself saying, shit, should I have left that stuff in? Because I'll guarantee you, if we wouldn't have this conversation right now, Todd and I'd be having it later. Because I would have been like Tuesday night, I'd be saying, Todd, what do we do with this? Do we leave it in? Do we take it out? And usually we leave stuff in, but there's been a couple times that we've shaved some stuff out. So I feel a lot more comfortable after hearing you say that, which was, once again, well articulated. So
no, I appreciate your asking. Not everyone does. So,
and I'm coming from a place, and I've told Todd, we both do. I come from a place of love. I want this to be a loving conversation. The last thing I want to do is, make anybody feel uncomfortable or regret the conversation. So that being said, thank you. I appreciate it.
And I'm glad that you're willing to have the conversation, because like I said, I think it all boils down to communication. And if we don't have these, these conversations, we're never going to progress and move forward. People need to know how people feel, and sometimes it's raw. So I'm glad you were willing to talk with us about it. And I agree with what you just said, as far as this gives it context, as far as your art that we're going to talk about here. And we are going to talk about art on the podcast.
Good. I'm excited. Thank you so much for appeasing me or whatever.
No, I think that
appeasing. What's the word?
I appreciate you being conscientious, Wes.
Thank you.
And Adri, if you hadn't felt comfortable with it, I would have just dropped it. But there was a couple questions that, relate to your art that I definitely wanted to ask. But we went down this rabbit hole, like right off the get-go, like right off the starting line here.
Boom.
Boom. Let's hit it.
Made
hard.
my head hurt. Made Wes uncomfortable.
So I want to circle back to you deciding to join the military. That was an experience I imagine that was that opened your eyes to a lot of things, and probably it sounded like you're incredibly intelligent person, but maybe you didn't have the discipline. Did your military experience give you some discipline, do you think?
I feel like discipline is such a relative term. Outside looking in, one would say that perhaps I learned some discipline from being in the military. And simultaneously, I was the kid who taught myself how to juggle and ride a unicycle. And I used to practice soccer as a goalkeeper by myself. And I figured out ways to do that. And I would do that for hours on end, in addition to my practice, in addition to the games I was playing. So I feel in a lot of important ways, I was plenty disciplined. I was stalling for time. I didn't know what my next step was, and I needed to do an in-between thing that was not flipping burgers in Las Vegas, New Mexico.
Right.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, that totally makes sense. As far as, I think there's a lot of kids that feel the way that you did. I was one of those kids where I didn't figure out what the hell I wanted to do. I didn't take the military path. Instead, I flipped burgers, waited tables, bartended, did all those kind of things until I was like, all right, I've had enough. Actually, it was my ex-wife that said, hey, I appreciate the fact. Yeah, she's had enough. Dude, get your act together. So it was more of like just trying to work out in your head what your next step was. Essentially. So,
having left a boarding school, an international school, I had already had I'd had an amount of exposure to languages. And so my school counselor, and again, in hindsight, I wonder about her motives, recommended that I join the military because they had a really robust language program where you could learn an entire language from the bottom up. I was like, all right, dope. Let's do that then. So I went in. Someone had told me the Marine Corps had the hardest boot camp. So I said, cool, I will do that one. Not realizing that by the time I got to language school, that my choices in language were down to 4. Whereas had I gone like Air Force or Navy, I could have chosen just about any language spoken in the world. So with the choice between Spanish, Russian, Arabic, and Korean, I chose Arabic. And so I worked as an Arabic translator for the military.
Nice.
Wow. That's really cool.
I took that. Well, we all take that language course in boot camp. I remember it. Well, and that portion where it's not really about language is about how well you learn a language. And I ended up in aviation supply in the Marine Corps. So, hey, there we go. So evidently, I don't have what it takes to learn a second language. So
yeah. Meanwhile, Arabic was like the third one I'd attempted. So.
Oh my God. And that is like a foreign language. Holy smokes. That's going to be a tough language to learn.
It was interesting. I actually picked it up with relatively quickly. And I think part of it was because having been in the schools that I was in, I had access to the sounds. So even, being among students and not knowing what they were saying, I still heard the words. I heard the sounds. I had a point of reference. But then, now as I learn more about history and the interconnectivity of the globe, recognize that through various trade routes, there were some words that I had learned in other languages, in Italian and Spanish, that actually applied to Arabic as well. So I remember very specifically, we were in class and it was a reading class. And in early days, as we were trying to get comfortable with the alphabet and learning how to pronounce the words and pronounce the letters even, not just the words, our teachers would write cognates on the board. And so cognates are basically languages or words in one language that sound similar to words in another, right? And so, he's writing computer and, like modern conveniences that would have been created in an English-speaking language or an English-speaking country that then, they would have adopted that word almost wholesale, in Arabic. And then he writes the word ananas on the board. And so I look at it and I say, ananas. He's like, yeah, sorry, this one is a little bit of a trick. I was like, pineapple? And he's like, how do you know this? I was like, it's the same thing in Spanish. And so, I was able to make these kinds of connections because of all the various forms of input that I've been having over the years.
Yeah.
So you did your military service. How long were you in the Marines?
I did 5 years active duty.
And during the whole time, working out what you wanted to do for your next step, because you knew from very early on that you wanted to be an artist. Is that correct?
Yes. So I had my mom send my sketchbook to boot camp. And I remember distinctly on my first tour in the Middle East, sitting in a Humvee, guarding the motor pool and, drawing the album cover. It was Shakira and drawing in her in my sketchbook. So it was something that I just always kept track of, something I always continued to work on and grew and expand. So I would say the greatest amount of discipline I got in the military was, continuing to teach myself art.
Yeah. Through boredom. If nothing else. My experience in the military is like you're really busy and then you're really bored. Of course, I was never in during wartime, so that's a totally different animal. The military during peacetime is not a fun place to be.
Horrifying and boring.
Yeah, a lot of cleaning.
But I always really wanted it. You know what I mean? So I was very specific about what skills I was working on. I was always working on portraiture. I was always working on, learning the human body, the human form. I think by the time I got out, I'd already purchased maybe 4 books on how to draw comic book characters, so I was paying attention to the things that drew me in and really actively honing different skills. I had about a 6-month stretch where I didn't allow myself to use a pencil. All of my drawing was in pen exclusively, so I wouldn't get comfortable erasing. Or I should say, I would get uncomfortable not being able to, or I would get comfortable not being able to erase. Those are the words.
There we
go. So you've always been self-motivated and self-directed, just not necessarily what other people thought they wanted you to do, right?
That is
you want to do
it. I've always been a big fan of the Samuel Clemens, Mark Twain quote, "I never let schooling get in the way of my education." So I've always been self-motivated. My mom told me, actually, I didn't even realize this. I learned how to read when I was 2 because I really, really wanted to. So my mom found me a person to teach me. And so I've been reading since the age of 2 and taking in information. And then, in my elementary school years, my favorite books were about characters who learn how to teach themselves stuff from books. And so then I started doing that. So I've always been self-motivated in that way.
Yeah.
I love that. I always find people like yourself really inspiring that have that can-do attitude. And it's not that there's not fear involved, but you don't let that stop you in your tracks and you don't let it get in your way.
Yeah. So that's one of the interesting things about having been raised the way that I was. My mom always reminded us, just like, you're Black, so you've got to work twice as hard for what you have or for anything that you get. And she also told us that anything you set your mind to, you can do. And anything you go to do it well. And so I've applied that to as many things as I've tried.
So it sounds like you had a really supportive family.
Funny story.
That's why we're here.
I am the child of Caribbean immigrants and Caribbean immigrant myself. So, there was this notion of, we left a whole country so that you could be more prosperous. Therefore, please pick a thing in which you will be more prosperous. And so it took, I say, the better part of 15 years to convince my parents that me being an artist was a good idea.
That's so true, though. You have this misconception that art, you'll never make any money. Music, you'll never make it. Acting, you'll never make it. And yet, people find a way to do it. If they love the art form and they want to make it a career, they find a way to do it and make money doing it.
Yeah.
That's funny. I love those stories.
Yeah, I do too. And you seem like a person that you just don't take no for an answer. Like, if you get something in your head, you're going to make sure it happens.
Pretty much. Yeah. Obviously I'll be as respectful about it as I can be, but as long as the only one suffering consequences is me, then yeah, I'm going to keep going.
So you went to a formal art school. You went to the same art school that I went to, the Art Institute of Colorado.
Okay. Yeah.
Was it the Art Institute of Colorado when you went there, or was it Colorado Institute of Art?
It was AIC and not CIA.
Yeah. See, I'm a bit older than you. So when I went there, it was CIA. So AIC, you applied for that before you left the military?
Yeah. So actually, I had applied to the Art Institute online in early 2004 and was all set to start taking online courses. And then they deployed me to Iraq. And so I was out there for 7 months. And when I came back, I had about 6 months or so left on my contract. And I was like, well, going to online school at this point is dumb. I might as well just wait and then go to a brick and mortar. Since I'd already begun the enrollment process, the lazy aspect of me was like, I've already enrolled in school. We're doing this. Let's just go to the one. I didn't bother to look around to see what else was there. And, by this point, because I was already confident as a self-taught person, in all the various things that I do, to me, it didn't actually matter where I went. To me, it was really a matter of, having the experience, using the money the military was giving me, and, recognizing that wherever I wound up was going to be a springboard, because anything that I wanted to do, I was still going to have to do it on my own.
And how did you feel about that education that you got there? I mean, obviously you're self-directed, but as far as the instructors and the instruction that you received?
I mean, I was able to leverage it. I took media arts and animation, and it was broad but not deep, I think is probably the best way to describe it. So, I learned so many different aspects of the animation process, from hand-drawn 2D animation to 3D modeling and 3D animation and everything in between. I basically kind of looked at that as, here's all these different options, that I can play with, and what thing do I like best, and where do I want to place my focus. But I've found myself over the years, applying many different aspects of that education. So even without the depth, knowing where to start on a thing was incredibly helpful to me.
So you developed some of those tools for your tool chest. You had all these tools available because you'd experienced all these different things and at least had a jumping off point and a foundation.
Yep, that's pretty much how I looked at it.
How did you feel as far as them preparing you to be what I like to call as a entrepreneur?
Yeah, we had one class in contracts and negotiations, but even that was really still focused on when you get into the, into the room for an interview with a company. It wasn't really about entrepreneurship per se. And so that was definitely something I was woefully ill prepared for. It took me a few years of floundering around a bit, you know. So I got out of school, started some freelance, got lucked into some what I thought at the time were high paying gigs, you know. In hindsight, I was like, man, that was chump change. But I very quickly reached the point where like I couldn't afford the basic stuff, you know. So I got a job. And then I discovered that I don't like having jobs. I was in that job for 3 years and hated it most of the time. And so, you know, jumped out of the pool, failed for a bit, jumped back in the pool. And then eventually I started taking business courses and actually learning what the keys to business success were. You know, it took me a little while of figuring out how those things applied to me. A lot of those courses are very broad strokes. They're very, you know, you have a solution to your customer's problem. And I'm like, nobody has a problem that involves art. Like, except they don't have any and they want some. Like, I don't know what to do with this information. But I eventually learned how to sift through, you know, the various wording that they were passing down to us, especially as far as marketing was concerned, and reach something that, you know, made sense to me that I could apply to myself and to my business. And, you know, ultimately it got to a point where I've been self-sustaining since 2018.
Nice.
I think it's a hard decision to make, to do the jumping off part of it, right? To decide that you're just going to, this is what I'm going to do. And I'm going to be a full-time artist and I don't care what it takes. So you took business classes and then you just educated yourself. What were some of the things that you learned during that time that really helped you? Is there anything that stuck out in your mind? Because we like to pass on tips to other artists. And if you have anything that you'd like to share, that would be great.
I mean, the biggest thing, and this is the thing that was prevalent in every single form of business coaching, because I did have a coach for a time, so I wasn't completely solo. But yeah, every form of business coaching, business education, even when it came to art business, find your niche. Find that thing that you do and that people will know you for, and then figure out who the people that want to know you are and, you know, talk to them. I would say that was absolutely the biggest thing. And so, you know, in 2016, created this series, Women Behaving Badly, about women in history. And, you know, I rocked that series out. I had just got off my honeymoon. I had 4 months left to do these paintings for this show. And I banged out 10 paintings in 4 months, including the research. Very surface level Wikipedia research. It was not deep. I actually ended up doubling back for the depth later on. But, you know, that show was incredibly successful as far as how many people came to see it, as far as sales that I made of prints and eventually of originals. All kinds of things were falling into place. And then I just sort of slipped back into doing the regular freelance gigs. And I realized that after about a year, I hadn't painted a new woman in history yet. And so I made the decision to just stop doing anything that wasn't that. And, you know, I took a hit for a while, but eventually people came to know me as the person who paints women in history. And then I was asked to talk about it in schools. And then I was asked to do specific projects for specific organizations. And then those organizations started buying my stuff. And, you know, it just kind of all spread from there. And it really started when I started saying no to everything that wasn't my niche.
So that was really your catalyst right there, making that conscious realization that, hey, I really enjoy doing this series about women that have been overlooked in history, correct?
Yeah.
And highlighting them and then figuring out how you're going to do it. What was the true start for that project? Because I think it's an interesting concept. How did you hit upon that? Because I think it's so cool. I mean, history in school does not teach you about anything, essentially. You know, it's just they just gloss over stuff. And most kids hate history, right? Most kids hate history. So to make it interesting and to highlight people that have been overlooked over time, I just think it's genius.
Mm-hmm. It started in a few places. actually the biggest thing, and it was something that I didn't put in the story, but is very much a part of it. So I've been practicing this martial art called Capoeira for the better part of 15 years now. And it is an Afro-Brazilian martial art, started with enslaved people in Brazil. So what, 400 years ago, something like that. In the association that I'm a part of, one of the heads of our association, one of the three leaders, is the first North American woman to receive the rank of mestre, which is the highest rank that you can have in capoeira. It's a martial art that is paired with music. You know, the music is a way of disguising it to make it look more like a dance than a fight. And one of the songs that Mestre Sueli, that's her name, would sing is called Ela Joga Capoeira, which means she plays capoeira. So I had this idea that I wanted to do a series of t-shirts, because by that point I had designed like most of our event shirts for like 8 years for my school. I wanted to do a series of t-shirts called Ela Joga Capoeira, and it was going to be about the women of capoeira. And so, you know, I started researching just like a little bit, but really because there's not a great deal of documentation about the martial art in general, and women in it specifically, you know, I kept finding conflicting things of like, who was the first female mestre? And like, there were like 3 different people who supposedly held that title. And so I put that project on pause, and actually it's still been on pause. But I had an opportunity in 2016 to show at Coffee at the Point, and it's a, you know, local Denver cafe, Black owned, and odd connection between that and the World College, which I will double back for because that's a fun story. And, you know, the curator was, you know, she's this woman who wanted to do something about women in politics, you know, because 2016 election, Hillary Clinton looked like she was doing well, you know, and she was like, this is a historic moment. We got to capture it. I got scared of the political aspect of it, so I definitely shied away. I didn't want to kind of go there and make that kind of statement. And what I realized is that I wanted to kind of I wanted something that was sort of entry level, that would give people the understanding of how little we know about women's history in general. And so I was very intentional about selecting women that I hadn't heard of until, you know, either they'd been recommended to me or through various avenues I learned about. You know, it was such a mixed bag, you know, so we've got Dolores Huerta, Sojourner Truth, Shirley Chisholm. Like I didn't go for like the top of mind women that, you know, we tend to do, because that's what we do, right? We pick a few and think we've done enough. And so right. I'm like, I'm going to go off script here, you know, and pick individuals that I hadn't heard of, you know, and that's how it began. And so inevitably people would come through and they would read the bios that I put, because I felt the text was important. And within the bios, I chose to answer 3 questions. Who was she? What did she do? And why does she matter? And that last piece harkens to that thing you said about how when we learn about history in school, it's very boring. We have no connection. We don't care. And so the why does she matter is the why should I care? And inevitably people would come through and be like, wow, I'd never heard, I feel bad. I've never heard of this person. And I was like, well, how would you, you know, like, unless you're an historian or you're, you know, some kind of history geek, like you weren't set up to know this information. And so that is why I'm giving it to you.
So who is your first one you did?
The very first one I did was a woman by the name of Lema Bowie. She is Nobel Peace Prize winner 2010 from Liberia. And I chose her because as I was getting ready to start painting this series, I was invited to the opening of what was then, no longer is, the Afrique Mall. And this was a mall in Aurora that was started by, I think it was mostly Ghanaians. I think there were a few other African groups involved, but I think that was the core. And so they were doing like this kind of opening ceremony. And by that point, I'd kind of established that I would do like live paintings. And so I would set up a piece enough and then, you know, bring out my easel and my watercolors and then just like paint while a party is going on around me. The woman who asked me to do it, you know, she asked if I could do one of 3 female African leaders. Lema Bowie was on the list. I read her bio and was like, are you kidding me? Yes. So now I'll tell you her bio.
Good.
So Lima Bowie, she lived in Liberia. That country had been undergoing a civil war for the better part of a generation. Actually, technically 2 wars almost back to back. So practically one long ass war. And she had worked as a trauma counselor, was mostly working with child soldiers because both sides were using children to fight the war, and recognized that, the country itself was incredibly traumatized. And so she joined an organization called WIPNET, which is Women in Peacekeeping Network. And this was an organization of, mostly women, mothers, sisters, who had experiences, with either losing someone to war or experience atrocities of war firsthand. At first it was kind of like a support group. And then eventually it became more than a support group. There was also an organization that she founded, which is slipping my mind at the moment. I will come back for it if I remember it. But basically, they were very religious. And so they would get together and they would have these, prayer circles. And then they started taking those prayer circles outside and just kind of doing those out in public. That expanded into peaceful protests, expanded into, a whole gang of women, 100 strong, outside the football stadium that the president would pass by every day on his way to his office, and got to the point where there was enough national and international publicity where they found their way into the building, convinced the president to hold meetings with the warlords. The warlords and the president thought this was a great time to just, have like a little mini vacation and chill by the pool and have drinks and still allow this war to wage while not actually initiating peace talks. And so then the women started gathering outside the building where they were supposed to meet and eventually got inside. Imagine you've got these dudes in this conference room. They're supposed to be talking peace, but they're not. They come out of the conference room. There's about 20 women in the lobby, and they're not going to let these guys leave until such time as they develop a peace treaty. These guys get very upset. And so they decide they're going to take these women bodily out the room. Here's the thing. In Liberia and in other African communities, it is shameful for a man. It's like putting a curse upon him if a woman, especially of a certain age, removes her clothing in front of him in public. And so seeing these men approach, Lima Bowie started removing her clothing, as did the women around her. These dudes, so afraid of being cursed and all of the things that came, with this cultural knowledge of what was happening in front of them, turned back around, went inside, formed a peace treaty in 2003, and the country has been peaceful ever since.
That's crazy.
That's powerful.
It is.
Right? So how do you not paint that?
Right.
Wow. That's an amazing. That's a fantastic story.
Yeah.
So who are some of the other women that you've, obviously you have a connection to all these women, being, painting them and learning about who they are. Who are some of your favorites that you had no idea about that you were like, oh, wow.
Yeah. Every time I ask this question, I still have the same two, Shirley Chisholm and Audre Lorde. Shirley Chisholm was the first Black woman elected to Congress in 1968. She was born here in the United States, but her family were immigrants, also from the Caribbean. In fact, she was, her mother was from Barbados. And actually, I think both her parents were from Barbados in this sense. And so when she was little, her parents had come over during the Great Depression or just before the Great Depression. So by the time she was born and her sisters were born, it was really hard to make ends meet in general, and damn near impossible if you were Black, if you had multiple children. And so they actually sent her and her sisters back to Barbados to live with their grandmother. And so her early upbringing and education was very similar to my own in that sense. And so when she came back over to the US, she spent a longer time there. So she kept her accent. I lost mine. She started looking into, she was interested in politics from an early age. But of course, with things being what they were in the 50s and 60s, she was kind of pushed into education. And so she got into early childhood education, helped run daycare centers, things of that nature. But, that politics bug was still within her. And so she eventually got involved in local politics. She lived in New York. She was in the Bedford-Stuyvesant neighborhood. And local politics ended up leading her into national politics, to where she was able to run for Congress. She ran on a platform of unbought and unbossed. So all of her campaign funds were very much grassroots small donations. She refused to take any big donors because she did not want to be beholden to special interests. And that was something she took with her to the Capitol. She said that the number of times that she was told that she was committing career suicide was immense. And every time somebody said that to her, she knew that she was on the right track and was doing the right thing. So she eventually ran for president in 1972. And as you would imagine, having never heard of President Shirley Chisholm, she did not win. But at the time, she actually made it further in the primaries than any woman had on a major party ticket. And that is to include Victoria Woodhull, who was the very first woman to run. She had Frederick Douglass as her running mate, even though he did not know that she had him as her running mate. So, but yeah, so I mean, Shirley Chisholm, I would say, huge inspiration. And in listening to audio clips of her, aside from the fact that she had a higher voice and a slight lisp, listening to her was like listening to my mom, so like that Caribbean connection, that striving for excellence, all those things that I had instilled in me when I was little, I felt were very present in her as well. And then Audre Lorde was the other one. Again, child of Caribbean immigrants. I think her mom was from Guyana, and then her dad was also from Barbados. And so, she was, as she liked to put it, a Black lesbian feminist mother warrior poet. And, I am many of those things. Like, the pathways that she took in her life, I felt were also very similar to mine. Being the bookish kid who didn't quite fit in, having very charismatic siblings, although I was the oldest and she was the youngest, like I still was not as good at making friends as my brothers were. Being, kind of isolated in that way, just by virtue of what I look like, in addition to my basic temperament and shyness at the time. The fact that, as a lesbian in a society that doesn't necessarily accept that, and especially with, such stark separations between how the Black community views homosexuality and how, mainstream white community views sexuality. Early encounters were predominantly with white women as opposed to with Black women, because I didn't think that I could pull it off, and so there were so many similarities. The fact that, she went from being poet, me artist, and going into education and having that education being an eye opener and learning, different aspects of how the world works, and then taking that education and turning it into activism and then using her art form as activism. It's like all of the things that just feel like, some of it I kind of found myself on the path before I discovered her. And some of them after I discovered her said, yeah, no, I think that's a good path. So those are my two top two.
Those are awesome examples of power. And, Chisholm, powerful woman, especially in her time, just off the heels of the civil rights movement. She was a powerful voice in Congress. Absolutely. Yeah.
And the way that she was able to transform the ways that they tried to pigeonhole her. I mean, she came from, the most urban of areas, and they were like, cool, you are now in charge of the Department of Agriculture and Veterans Affairs. She was like, the fuck? But then turn that into the WIC program, Women's, Infants, and Children, because she was like, okay, well, what we're going to do is we're going to take this agricultural surplus and then we're going to take it to, these poor women in inner city who can't afford to feed their children.
Yeah. That WIC program is amazing. When I was in the Marine Corps, I was married and my daughter was born and we didn't have any money. Base pay for a Lance Corporal was crap. And so we were on WIC, so yeah, it was a great program. And I'm totally impressed with her. And my understanding is Vice President Harris has her pearls, her pearl necklaces that she wore, or necklace that she wore all the time.
I don't know if I realized that, but that's amazing. I love it.
Yeah. Yeah.
That is amazing. Talk about these pieces. They're mixed media pieces. Is that the way it started out? The project? Okay.
Yes, those pieces were intentionally mixed media. So up until that point, I'd been creating portraits, just, here's a person's face and some abstract watercolor splashes in the background. But I knew that with this series, I wanted to tell much more story with my art than just showing someone's face. And I didn't want to fully rely on the text that I was putting beside it, because I realized pretty early on that I really wanted to reach kids. And, with the way the education is in this country, not everybody's as literate as I tend to write. I've learned to tone things down and kind of drop things to maybe a 7th or 9th grade level, sometimes to 6th grade if I use an app. But otherwise, I'm very educated and I use the words that I have. And so I wanted the imagery to really tell as much of the story as it could. So I taught myself at a collage. I mean, obviously you cut out some paper, glue it down, but at least as far as how to leverage collage as a storytelling element, I felt that was essential. And so with each piece, I would either ask myself, what did this person do that I can show via image? Or I would ask myself, what was the world like for this person that I can show in images?
From the beginning to now, even though they started out as mixed media, have you seen the work evolve, or have you kind of stuck to kind of the same kind of idea or template?
Well, I intentionally instituted things that would randomize and keep me from having a full-on template. So the way that I shaped the boards was also very intentional. I wanted to make sure that, I wasn't like, okay, here's a rectangle. This is where I place this face in a rectangle. This is where, I wanted to make sure that there was a distinct amount of variety from piece to piece so that I could tell each story as it needed to be told based on the surface that I was working with. Yeah, since then, though, I've definitely evolved and just found different ways of doing things. I created a deck of trading cards with the Denver Women's Commission. That's kind of taking me back to here's just the face. But because it's the trading card format, everybody expects to read it, so you flip it over and you get the stats on the back.
I saw that and I love that. I thought that was a great idea. So yeah, that was amazing. I just kind of happened upon it when I was looking at your website and I'm like, oh my God, trading cards. How brilliant is that?
Yeah, it was my brothers and I, we were comic book geeks back in the day, and we had the Marvel Comics collector cards back in the day. So I was like, yeah, we used to have books and books of those, in those little sleeves. I thought it'd be cool to just have something that folks could collect, small artwork. And I do plan on expanding on those, just finding the time.
So can we talk about collage work? Because that's something we haven't really discussed too much here, maybe once or twice. But what's the trick of creating a really good collage? I'm sure there's some secrets to it. How do you approach it?
I'm sure there's so many different ways of doing it. There's actually an exhibit right now at Redline, so outside that door. And it's, all photography, and a good amount of it is collage, and there's so many approaches. For me, I think of it in terms of what do I want to show people, and what do I want to show? What story am I trying to tell? Those are always the top two. That's where I always start. And then from there is what's the best way to do it? There's some things where, you cut out a nice little square, a little box around something because it's box shaped, or because I want it framed a certain way. There's other times where, I will completely cut out the silhouette of whatever character and stack and overlay. With collage, you're relying a lot on juxtaposition. And so, to tell the story of, say, school segregation, I will take disparate images that were still part of that overall story historically, but I'll put them together to really hammer them home, in the mind of the viewer. And then, the other thing that at least I do, like, because it's mixed media, it's not pure collage, it's not pure painting, it's a bunch of things. I would often print my background images in black and white and then kind of glaze a color over it. And so now you have this sort of visual texture that is being formed by the photos, but they're still beneath, this veneer of a color. So if you see it from a distance, you don't necessarily get it right away, what's happening. And then when you come up close, you're like, oh, that colorful background is actually also telling a story.
That's amazing.
So the background of the woman is the background.
Yes, exactly it. Depending on how much I learned about her, how much time I've given myself to do the painting, that's always a factor. And, how much information I have access to. There's a lot that you can tell from the background. And one of my favorite things to do, especially if I'm, in front of a class of students, is to talk about my work and tell a woman's story while pointing at different parts of the background. Even for me, it's almost like they're visual cues. So instead of reading off of note cards and be like, well, I put that picture there, so I'm going to tell that part of the story. And I put this picture here, so we'll tell that part of the story.
Yeah, that's a great way to remember the narrative. That's awesome. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I hope that in doing so and pointing that they remember the narrative also.
So how many pieces are in this series as of right now?
Between 35 and 40, I think.
That's a great body of work. I mean, that's incredible. And I'm with Wes. I think it's the whole trading card thing is brilliant, but I think the whole series itself is just phenomenal. And it's beautiful. Like, you do beautiful, stunning work.
Thank you.
So have you sold some of the original paintings of these women that you've done in the series, or are they all still part of your collection?
I've sold about half of them.
Have you? Okay.
Yeah.
Is that hard when you've spent so much time, essentially spending time with these women, because you research, and then I feel like as an artist, you have this connection when you start painting her and putting together the pieces of her story. Is that hard to part with that piece? I mean, obviously everybody needs money and we like to have money. That way we can have the freedom to be an artist, but I imagine it's gotta be hard to let those go.
Well, that was the interesting thing about having done freelance for so long. I mean, I was painting portraits of people's family members. For a while I was doing pet portraits, things of that nature. And I'm so accustomed to do a piece, it goes away. Do a piece, it goes away. And so, by the time I did these, I got comfortable with them going away. And so, I spend good amounts of time of not seeing them. But then there are those moments where I actually get to go to the places where they are. So, for example, the first one was purchased before I even did the show. I took it to the Black Arts Festival to kind of like promote the show, and then somebody bought it. So I had to borrow it from her so it could be in the show. So yeah, I felt very fancy putting on loan from the collection of, But the next 5 went to Girls Inc. of Denver, which was one of the places that I showed afterward. I was actually in their building just last week because I will be doing a mural there. And, I got to see them again. So to know that my artwork is in a place where hundreds of girls from K through 12 get to see them daily, I mean, that's what is better. I'm perfectly happy with it not being in my studio, in that sense.
That's cool. And I didn't know that these had been acquired by, like organizations and stuff. So the fact that they're out in the public somewhere where other people can see them, yeah, that's the best, right?
Yeah. Only 2 of them have gone to private collections. The remainder, so that is like 12 now, are in public spaces.
Nice.
So when the Smithsonian comes knocking and they want to see the whole collection together, they're going to have their work cut out for them to track them all down. I know where they're all at, but they're going to have to go do a little bit of legwork, right?
Yep, that's the plan.
They can work for it.
We don't have to commission new ones, whatever the case may be.
And you continue to make more for the series. You're still doing it, and I assume you'll continue to do it.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, it's as I tell people, my list is so very long of women who have yet to be painted by me, or in some who have yet to be painted, period, and so anytime I'm asked to like repeat something like, it's like, oh, are you going to do Sojourner Truth again? No, I'm sorry. I've already done that one. The only difference, I would say the only concession I would make is if I was asked to put her on a mural. But then again, I would still only do it once.
That makes sense. As you add to these, do you envision at some point having them like doing a book or anything? I mean, I think it'd be pretty incredible to have a whole book of these amazing women where you have, their information and the portraits. And I imagine that in some instances, and I'm not positive of this, but this may be the only time that they've ever been painted, right?
Yeah. I've definitely thought about that. And the thing that I feel is most important is that I don't do it in the way that it's already been done. So, there are so many books, especially children's books, about women in history, and they all follow the same format. Here's a picture of a lady, here's her information. Here's a picture of a lady, here's her information. Turn the page, picture, info. And I feel that, it's valuable to see that, but what is equally valuable, if not more so, is to show the ways in which their lives have intertwined. And so, some of these women were contemporaries of one another and therefore traveled in the same circles and knew one another and, conferred and all that other stuff. Some of these women were doing similar things or even very different things at similar time periods, even if they were separated by space, by a geography. So the example that I like to use is, you think of Marie Curie during World War I. So Marie Curie, she was the first woman to win the Nobel Prize, only woman to win two of them for both physics and chemistry. But she also was the first person to use X-rays for medical purposes. I might be misspeaking when I put it quite that way, but, she came to the understanding very early on, especially in the war, that these young men were dying of infections caused by shrapnel left in their bodies. And that surgeons were not finding the shrapnel because they didn't realize that the entry site is not necessarily where the stuff ends up. And so she was taking X-ray machines on these ambulances, they called them little Curies, to the war zones and teaching doctors how to use them and find the foreign materials, foreign objects in the people's bodies, and actually operate at the site of the material as opposed to, where they thought it was. And so thousands of lives were saved as a result. And then over here in the United States, still during World War I, you have Jane Addams, who was actively protesting against the war and organizing groups of women, not just here in the States, but also overseas. So you had a whole coalition of women who were members of both the Allied and the Axis forces in an effort to try to stop the war from happening. And so that's a World War I connection. And we don't even think about women with regard to the wars at all. Right. But these two women were doing very different things at the same time period with regard to this very global conflict that was taking place. Any story that I would put together in a book with the women that I've painted thus far and women that I plan on painting in the future, I feel like I would want to find those connections and highlight them rather than just saying, here's a story, here's a story, here's a story.
I love that.
Yeah.
I think it's a great idea. I would buy that book. So let us know when it happens.
Yep.
So you work in a variety of mediums. Tell our listeners what all you do, because you do a multitude of things. You have a lot of irons in the fire.
Yeah. So my favorite medium is watercolor. And I learned basically through this process how many ways in which I can force watercolor into a situation it doesn't want to be in. So with my collage work, with this series, I started off by painting on paper. Like I would take watercolor paper, get my image on, get the sketch of the person onto it, cut that out, very carefully glue it onto the pre-collaged board, and then paint the watercolor from there. But, with that process, there's always the risk of accidentally getting a little glue on the surface of the paper. And if you know anything about watercolor at all, glue acts as a resist. Watercolor must absorb into the substrate, and glue does not absorb anything. And so you just kind of end up with a bright spot where you didn't want one. So I started just using technology that's available to me. The company Golden makes a number of materials that you can paint onto a surface, and once they dry, they will be absorbent. One of them is literally called absorbent ground. One of them is called fiber paste. There's light dimensional ground, there's watercolor ground. There's a bunch of different things. So my favorite right now is kind of a very diluted combination of absorbent ground and fiber paste. Because absorbent ground is actually not as absorbent as I want it to be. Fiber paste is way too much. And so the mixture of the two feels like it's just right. And so I paint that on in layers and very, very thin coats. And then once that's built up, I now have a surface that looks like paper and behaves like paper, but isn't paper. So I avoid that whole glue substrate thing.
That's amazing. And it was just trial and error. You saw that these two different things were acting in a certain way, and you were like, well, what happens if I mix them?
Essentially, yeah. Oh, no, because I had some where I was like, why is this bleeding you put the drop down and it's just like, just spreads out all over the place. Whereas, with the absorbent ground alone, it stayed a little bit more surface level. And I actually have pieces where it just cracked a bit, which is also a cool effect, but not the one I was going for.
Right.
And so, yeah, it took me a little bit to learn it. And then I had one, man, I'm not sure I can't remember what my application was like or whatever, but I was painting Maria Tallchief, and there was something about the way that I put the ground onto the board. And when I started painting, the way it absorbed into the watercolor absorbed, it was just the splotchiest thing ever. And I couldn't get it to not be splotchy. And I actually had to start that piece over because it was just so bad. And then Isadora Duncan, actually similar thing, but I kind of liked it that way. So I left it. And it had to do with personality of the individual that I was painting as well. I was like, Maria's Tallchief is not a splotchy person, though. She was a balanced, very precise. The splotchiness did not serve her well.
That's awesome.
Since I think 2019, you've been doing murals. Is that correct?
Absolutely, yeah. I did my first one on the side of Glenarm Rec Center in November of 2019. Actually, no, I lied. That was my second one. The first one I'd done in Aurora on a place called Mango House. But it was a different setup, But yeah, I would say the one that people started paying attention to, that people knew about, was the Glenarm Rec Center one. And then from there, it was a little while. And then I got to do the Black Lives Matter mural on Broadway in June 2020. And then it just kind of snowballed from there. And so I did a couple of mural festivals. I've done some indoor murals. I've done school murals, and I've actually got probably about 5 of them lined up for as soon as the weather warms up again.
That is awesome. How did the whole Black Lives Matter thing come about? Because the city of Denver commissioned that, didn't they? They
did, yes. So that actually had to do with a connection that I'd formed when I did the trading cards. So one of the women who was on the Women's Commission was involved in the mural project. And so she saw the list of folks that they were going to talk to, and they're like, why is Adri not involved in this? And so she recommended me. And then I didn't even realize there was another woman, Tariana Navas Nieves, who is with Arts and Culture. And she also recommended me for that project. And so that's how my name got put into the hat for it. And then it just, it ended up just being me and another artist, Pat Milbury. And so the two of us were like, we knew we were going to work together, but we were just trying to figure out what the design would be. It was a quick turnaround, like a week. between them contacting us and us actually starting on the project. Of the two designs that, we came up with, mine had the message and the look. Well, it had the look. The message was something I had to fight for because, bureaucracy.
What didn't they like about it? And tell our listeners, because it doesn't just say Black Lives Matters. There's more to it.
Yes. So it says Black Lives Matter, and it says remember this time. So when they first asked us to do the mural, they wanted something that was more Colorado oriented, because they'd seen the one that went up in DC. And so they were like, yeah, if you could do something with a Colorado flag or colors or, something like that. And, I sat with it and I thought about it and I was like, that doesn't feel right. That doesn't feel fitting, And so what I ended up doing was the words Black Lives Matter. And all of those were in dark colors on a white background. So white strips behind the words. And the word black was actually in multiple shades of brown. Because Black people's skin tones are multiple shades of brown. We go from as light as you to as dark as me to midnight blue black, and everything in between. And so I wanted to make sure that I showcased that with the piece. The white backgrounds were to show that, especially in this country, like no matter where we live, we are within a situation that was created by whiteness, surrounded by whiteness, affected by whiteness. And then the words, remember this time, they almost took them out and I had to fight for them. Those words were twofold. Number one, remember what is happening right now. I mean, during that time, we're in the middle, I think it was week 6 or 7 of protests that were taking place. It was the first time that in my living memory, so many white people were interested in learning about Black history, and were, taking that knowledge unto themselves, were actively going out and putting their lives and bodies on the line for Black rights. The level of globalism that we had experienced within the context of the protests, the ways in which people in other countries were recognizing the racial inequalities there. I mean, the fact that you have that same slogan works for Australian Indigenous people, as well as Americans, as well as South Africans, as well as, Black British people. That was the rallying cry for so many people, so far spread out around the world. This was something that was important to remember, and simultaneously, we have done this before. We have not done it to this scale. We have not done it to this depth. But we've done it before. The civil rights movement was very much full of, white folks who were looking at the situation, realizing their complicity, wanting to learn more. Not as many, but they were there. And wanting to learn more about education. The fact that we went from Negro History Week to Black History Month, that was a thing that happened during that time period. And we need to pay attention to the fact that these kinds of shifts have happened before. And damn it, can we please remember it this time around, that, so that we don't have to keep going through these big explosive things. Like if we actually are able to be conscientious and chip away at it, then we'll actually be able to overcome. So that's what I told them. And so they let me keep the words in.
I'm glad they did.
Awesome. Yeah.
I think humans have a short memory, right? And I think that was really smart on your part to want that in there and include that. And I love the message.
Well, the thing about memory, I feel it's so fascinating. We learn how to write and we learn how to print our words. We've externalized our memories. Our memories used to live in other people. We had the griots, we had the storytellers, we had the troubadours and all these different people who were kind of the repositories for memory, and they would use the oral history to go around, and tell people what the history was. And so that is how we used to take information in. And in all honesty, it's how we still do. And we think about the kinds of things that we remember collectively, that we think of as common knowledge. Those are basically stories that we continue to tell and retell. But the stories that we don't tell and retell, similar to women in history, those are the ones that get lost over time. And so it doesn't matter that they're written down if nobody's reading the books. and nobody's talking about the books. Nobody is sharing the story that they read in the books, right? So we are still very much reliant on the oral history. And so that was also part of what I was trying to get forth in those words. It's like, we need to keep telling this story, otherwise we will lose it.
And I'm just curious, when you had to fight for your design and what you wanted in this whole mural, was it a collective of different people, or was it all males?
Yeah, it was mostly the guys, and oddly enough, it was Black men. I that threw me off for some reason. They were the ones who just did not want, and actually, the more I've learned, so I have since been reading books on Black lesbian feminist thought, and I was like, oh, this totally makes sense now. But at the time, I was like, guys, do you know what I'm trying to do here? You understand? But yeah, it was mostly men. Like the two women who had, nominated me absolutely had my back. And, they went to bat for me and with me during those times of arguments. And there were moments where I was like, can you please just look, this is what he said. And I'm pissed off right now. It's like, I need you to back me up. So, it's so essential. This is why representation matters. I was in a meeting about this last night. It's not just about having somebody of color in a position of power. It is about having enough people of color in a position of power to actually be able to do something. So if nobody had my back, then that would have been a very different mural, and I might not have painted it.
Right. And I think it's important that you stuck to your guns and not just cave in and paint whatever they wanted. I admire that in you, that you're like, nope, this is what I want. This is what I feel it needs to be. And this is, I'm going to fight for it. So kudos to you.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah. Cause it'd be really easy just to say, to kind of feel like you're not going to win. So you just, capitulate and do their thing. That's the easy way out. It's much harder and much more, well, to use the same word, but different one. It's much more difficult to take the high ground and hold your guns. So kudos.
Yeah. Way to be a leader. That's what a leader does, And I think that's what women in general bring to the table always. Like, I don't think women are here. I'll get on my soapbox, Wes.
Here we go. Yeah.
I don't think women ever this is why I love your project, but I don't think women get the credit that they deserve. Women are the ones that keep our society, our culture moving forward. They're the keeper of the flame. They're the ones that pass on the traditions and the history and the information and the wisdom from one generation to the next. They're nurturers. And I think you're incredibly inspiring as an artist and as a person. I really do. So thank you for what you do and have done and will continue to do. You just recently finished a mural for Cleo Parker Robinson Dance Studio as well, which is absolutely stunning. Will you talk about that real quick and how that all came about?
Yeah, that's my favorite one.
Is it? It's beautiful.
Hands down, totally my favorite one. So interestingly, my connection to Cleo's is my connection to Capoeira. That her school, her dance studio, was actually where my school kind of started. No, not started, but like where it kind of lived in Denver, And a friend of mine who is still training, she works for Cleo Parker Robinson Dance. So she was the one who told me, hey, Cleo is thinking about doing a mural in the space. We'd like you to do it. Would you be interested? And I was like, yes, absolutely. So this mural was actually supposed to have happened in June in time for the 50th anniversary celebration of Cleo Parker Robinson Dance. It did not work out that way. As you can imagine, pandemic hit and, just everything became very up in the air. We put it on pause. And so I actually didn't get to start working on it until December of last year. This project was so cool because I got to actually work with Cleo herself. She is such a creative and inspirational person. And so, she and I sat down and we discussed what we wanted the mural to feel like, what elements we wanted to portray, She felt it was really important that the dancers be the second center of the mural as opposed to her, because to her, the school is her creation, it's her baby, it's her legacy, and so she wanted that showcased as much as possible. That was the focus. That's why it's about the dancers. And she's in there a couple times, but not in a hugely prominent sort of way. With the format of the wall, I felt it was important to go vertical. So we went through, a bunch of photos. I mean, they have so many photos that have been taken over the years of dancers, of different performances. And so this one felt, like the one that I wanted to portray, partly because of its verticality and just partly because of its elegance. And then, because I have, the collage aspect of my work, it really lent itself to being able to add all of these other elements. So just about every person who has been dancing with her for the last 10 years is on that wall. And it was so cool because while I was working on it, especially once I got to the part where the collages went down, because I did the painting first and that was the most of the week, about a week and change. About the first 4 to 5 days. And then, in a day, all the collage pieces went on, and it seemed like a very sudden change to anybody passing by. And so I would see the dancers, and they would stop and they would look to see who was in it. And one of them, told me, he was like, I've been in this building for 10 years and you go on every floor and there's all these pictures of these old folks that I'll never meet, that have been through here and they've already gone on. And it's just so cool to see us, this current generation. That was just definitely something that I loved being able to do, to not only have this to be about Cleo and about her accomplishments, but about the people who have come along with her for this ride, and who continue to be with her and, to make the institution as great as it is.
That's a great compliment, isn't it? And it relates and it resonates with the people that are there.
Yes, absolutely.
What other projects have you been working on as of late?
One that I literally just finished. So this is total departure from all the things that we've discussed thus far. The Athena project, they have a show that's on right now at Milk Market. And it is women in their infinite forms. And so there's 11 of us artists who were selected to participate in this. And we got to decorate mannequins. And so I got a mannequin and I decided that, I don't do abstraction. So she wasn't going to keep looking like a mannequin. I made her look like Angela Davis. And so it's that is the latest piece that I've done. And so, got to get some sculpture in. It's been a while since I've sculpted, not in the computer. So analog sculpture, so to speak.
And so that's the first sculpture you've ever done?
I wouldn't say it's first of that size for sure. I've done little tiny ones. I did one that was probably about 4 inches tall, years ago when I was still in school, but it's been quite some time since I played with, any kind of clay. But as I said, I've done, digital sculpture. So just, 3D modeling type stuff. So I had a point of reference for how to go about seeing the forms and making them look the way I wanted them to look. But it was definitely an interesting challenge.
Is this something you'd like to do more of?
Yeah, no, I started busting out the 3D software. I literally every time you share the screen, it disappears and it flashes to one of my 3D modeling softwares that I started doing a sculpture in because the screen is still up. So yeah, no, I definitely enjoy the process. I want to learn to do it better. And there's something about getting your hands that level of dirty. I don't get dirty really when I paint, except for when I'm doing murals, just because it's a numbers game. It's just so big. But mostly I'm on my little drafting table and everything's very contained, so I don't make a big mess. Sculpture is very messy. I love it.
What other things have you been working on?
Yeah, I've got a few more murals in the works. So just kind of in discussion and design about those. I want to actually, I mean, technically, I've received a grant to create a graphic novel. And it is about voting rights in the US through the lens of women in history. So, like, you know, most of it will be kind of broad strokes. Here are different laws that were passed in order to either suppress or increase voting rights. And then here are individuals who were involved in making changes to these laws or advocating in some way, or, you know, getting people registered to vote or whatever the case may be. And so all the individuals that I cite are women.
That sounds like a phenomenal project.
Yeah, so now I just got to go get over my fear of doing graphic novels. I've been reading them for so long. I understand all the principles that go into them, and there's just like a little bit of a fear factor in starting, but I'll do it.
Yeah, yeah. And wow, this is an important time to be doing something like that, because I'm just always amazed how far we keep, you know, we go forward and then Donald Trump doesn't win. So now we have to rewrite all our voting, you know, laws, and most of them will fall in the Supreme Court, state or national. But it's like, can we move on? Can we at least realize that we want as many people to be active participants? And now we're doing this again. So I'm glad to hear that you're going to be doing a graphic novel about it, because I think it's damn important that the next generation that's coming up or understand how brutal of a fight it's been, especially for women and people of color and Native Americans, and the list goes on. So I'm glad to hear that.
And, you know, to your point, the question is we, you know, you say, why do we keep doing this? Why do we keep changing laws when we know it's better? Like, well, there's the we in this room.
Right.
And then there's the we who are in power and always have been and want to make sure they stay that way.
Yeah. Part of me saying we is because I was born a Republican, and I don't know why I'm a Republican, because everything they keep doing is just contrary to what I believed in the Reagan administration, even though it even started then, you know, with the NRA. Like, we don't want people to vote.
Yeah.
So there's a great speech about that.
That's the other fascinating thing about this book that I'm reading. So I'm going to cite it again, The Sum of Us, and that's SUM. Because that is the thing that she talks about. You know, you have all of these laws that are passed that are made to suppress specific people without realizing that rather than being a rifle, it is very much a shotgun, you know? And so, yeah, you hit the ones you're targeting and you hit the bystanders as well. And unfortunately, or, you know, the consequence is that the vast majority of people who vote for this very same legislation are the bystanders. They are the ones who are the unfortunate beneficiaries of the suppressive laws that they're trying to put in place for the other person.
Yeah.
Well, this graphic novel sounds like it incorporates everything perfectly of what you do with your art. You got the art aspect, you got the educational aspect, and you got the activism all in there. So you'll have to keep us posted. And as soon as things start to shake out, let us know. I'll be happy to push out some promo stuff for you.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that's going to happen is I have to start saying no to stuff.
Again, right?
I'm going to have to work on this.
How has this last year been as far as like the COVID thing for you? Did you take a hit, or has it been pretty fruitful for you as far as the past year?
You mean as far as business-wise is concerned?
Yeah, I guess I should ask that. It's kind of a broad question. As far as artistically, it sounds like it was a really good year for you, but also business-wise.
Yeah. The COVID pandemic coinciding with the protests and just, you know, the elevation of civil rights movement. Civil rights movement didn't end in the 60s, and it actually didn't start then either. You know, it's still going. So, you know, all of those things, you know, that confluence of COVID and the protests and this national shift to wanting to be more interested in learning more about people of color and all the stuff that we've been dealing with has been very lucrative for me, if I'm to be honest. And, you know, I'm doing my best to make sure that I'm taking my wins and leverage that situation and to continue sharing and spreading as much as I can. So I know that a lot of people have suffered during this pandemic for a multitude of reasons, most of which has to do with, loss of employment or loss of opportunity, actual sickness, and being unable to work. In recognizing that very same situation has actually helped me. It humbles me for sure, and it makes me very aware of how I choose to proceed.
It's a responsibility, right?
Yes, absolutely.
And a huge one, but I'm glad you're up for it and I'm glad you're doing it. What kind of things do you do to promote your artwork and yourself?
Oh man, I was so much better about it for a while. Yeah, I mean, I have my social media page, mostly Instagram. It trickles over into Facebook, but that's only because the two are connected. But that's kind of the main thing. That and just, word of mouth, I would say, has been the key to my business, because I started off with this focus on education that got me into schools, which got me into organizations that do education in some way, shape, or form, like Girls Inc., which are affiliated with schools. Where a number of my other pieces live is a place called Cross Purpose, which they specialize in working with folks who are chronically unemployed or underemployed, giving them the tools that they need to get out of that situation. And then that led me into the Women's Commission and the Women's Hall of Fame and museums. And so that's kind of the progression. And so basically, as folks get to know me and what I do, they recommend me to entities that are a little higher and higher up in these educational spheres.
You strike me as somebody that gets a lot of their work from word of mouth, just from the work that you've done. So I think it's great that works for you. And it's refreshing to hear that word of mouth is still working and it's not all just social media stuff. Obviously, social media comes into play. Do you use social media a lot?
I used to do it more. But lately, I've been less focused on posting things in the way that I had been before. And I think it's just because I'm busier, but also because ultimately the word of mouth is working better, and so that's a major factor as well. I'm the kind of person who I like to have conversations with folks, which is why I'm here. The more people that I'm introduced to, that just increases my network. And so increases the number of people who kind of speak for me in that way. And so that's how I get a lot of my jobs. It's because I've created these relationships and nurtured them over time. I mean, shoot, there's folks that I get to work with now that I've known for 10 years, and we're now both in a situation where we can work together, where that wasn't necessarily true in the intervening time.
I think that's a thing that gets overlooked a lot by artists, is that whole networking aspect and the actual connection with people. Do you agree?
Oh yeah, it's massive. It's I would say it is the vast majority of my business. It's those connections that I've made with people over time.
Still having a face-to-face conversation means something. And I'm all about that. I hate texting, and I'm not a big fan of social media, but I do it. I'm much more of a pick up the phone and I want to talk to you,
Yeah. I tell folks I'm much better in the room, I can come up with copy, and I've gotten better over time. I would say my initial copywriting sounded very salesy and like, hey, would you like some art on your walls? But these days, I feel it's just so much better to just have a one-on-one, person-to-person conversation, share interests, share ideas, all of these different things. And then it's also much easier to pivot into something that will be mutually beneficial. Whereas if you're sending out social media messages, my girlfriend likes to say, is putting jewels on the highway or putting treasures on the highway. It's like, you don't know who's going to pick that up.
Have you gotten many sales or commissions via social media?
When I was doing portraiture, that was definitely more of a thing. But even so, it was like Facebook. So it was still friends, friends and friends of friends. Whereas these days, I mean, I've made like, some print sales, t-shirt sales here and there. But as far as like my big, oh no, actually I have people hit me up on Instagram periodically and ask me to do murals or come speak at a school. So it's still doing it. It's still working.
Still working.
Yeah. The cool thing about social media, I would say it's less about what I'm putting out and a bit more about how folks can find me easily.
So the bulk of your work these days, bulk of your income, does that come from these commissions of organizations and people reaching out to you?
Mixed bag, it is, yes, especially mural commissions, those are definitely the bigger ones. But then also, educational opportunities. So I have art classes that I teach through schools. I've got some that I've done, I think I've done 4 now for Google, because they've got, their online learning programs now. And so like I'm one of the people that they reach out to do a class for their cohort there. And then, especially for schools, like I give like talks. Sometimes they just want to have an artist talk about their life or a person of color talk about, their life and successes and what have you. Those are opportunities where I just get to share myself, and tell my story in much the way that I'm doing here. But this time for, a gang of 8th graders, who are questioning who they are and their place in the world. And so now they see a person who looks kind of like them or has an experience that's similar enough to theirs, even if I don't look like them, that they can identify with.
That's kind of nice that you get to go in and talk to kids and inspire them. Is some of this just pro bono stuff, or do you get paid for some of this stuff too?
I get paid for most of it. I do have my Patreon though. So I have folks who donate money to me monthly. And so when there is a situation where I feel very passionate about sharing with a school that wouldn't necessarily have a budget, that's when, that's how that's covered.
That's really cool that you do that. And I love that you have that. I saw that on your website talking about the whole Patreon thing and what you feel like, hey, if you can donate so much, or I get so many donations per month, then these are some of the things that I can do with that money.
Yeah.
And you spell that out, which I think is really smart. So people know exactly what your mindset is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And even some of the mural gigs that I've taken, I have my per square foot charge, price that I charge, but some of the gigs that I've done, are definitely less than I would charge normally. And again, it's enabled by the other things that I do. So the way that I look at it is there's some gigs that subsidize others. And so there are the people who want what I do, think it's cool, think it will make them look good, whatever the case may be, and they can afford to pay for it. And then there's the people who need what I do. I'm speaking to something that either tells their story or gives inspiration in a way that, they've never seen before, gives them options that they didn't know that they had. So they need that. And I want to make sure that they also have access to me. And so the one helps and subsidize the other.
So your Patreon account, is it specific for a certain project most of the time, or?
No, it's so it's different. It's not like Kickstarter. So Kickstarter is very project-based, Indiegogo, things of that nature.
Yep.
Whereas Patreon is like more evergreen. It's almost like a membership, but not really, or it's just not called a membership. The pricing structure is different than a membership would be. A lot of creators, they use their Patreon and will, have like special perks that they give to their patrons. That's a lot of energy. That's a lot of time. I don't have that kind of team, to make that sort of thing happen. Rather than say, I will do this specific thing if you pay me, I will say, I will do this sort of thing if you pay me. And so that sort of thing is the ways in which I'm able to give back to my community.
Okay. Yeah.
And still get paid, because as an artist, you need to get paid. And artists, a lot of times, I think artists as a whole tend to have good hearts and they want to do good for the community, but sometimes they get taken advantage of. And you should really be compensated in some way. And sometimes compensation is just giving back, but at the same time, you have to make a living. And in order to have an art life, you got to treat it like a business, right?
Absolutely. I think about it in terms of resources, right? So to me, money is a tool that enables us to do things. And, the more of us who think of it that way, I think the better off we'll be. And so rather than pursuing money for money's sake or pursuing money for, or like having fears around money, right? And what kind of person it'll turn you into if you've got too much of it. I see it as a tool. In order for me to be able to continue doing what I'm doing, like I need to not have to hustle. When I was in hustle mode, I wasn't doing as much for my community. I was just trying to survive. But with money, I am able to not hustle. And so I can be thoughtful about what my next project is. And, I can take the time to make sure that it is not only serving me and my needs, as in, making something that people want to pay money for, but I can also make sure that it is serving my community in some way as well. And then it gives me time to, get community inputs. So I've got a few projects coming in the pipeline in which, I will be conversing with community members about what they need this thing to look like, as opposed to just me going off on my own and coming up with a thing. Not having to hustle gives me the time, space, and opportunity to do that.
Are you a pretty frugal person?
Yeah. For the most part, I do have my splurges, but more often than not, my splurges are business related, so I'm like, I could really use this tool. I don't even know when I'm going to get around to using it right away, but I can see how it will be beneficial down the line. So right now I'm contemplating getting ZBrush. It's going to cost me about $1,000. So I have to really think and decide, do I need that software? Can I pull it off with other software? But I want
it. And you should have it.
And sometimes those tools, they really inspire you or push you in a different direction that you didn't even realize before you even got it. So sometimes that's really nice. So this leads to another question of mine, which is actually a Bob Ragland question. Do you know Bob Ragland?
I don't know if I do.
He's a longtime Denver artist. Anyway, he asked me to ask artists at one point or another, what do you do when you get a big paycheck? So you get a big commission or you sell a painting. What do you do with that money?
20% goes into the savings account so I can cover taxes, because that's a thing that I need to not forget about. 50% goes into my personal account to handle, just whatever needs that I have. And so I've been working really hard to be able to live off 50% of my income. So that the remainder can stay in the business and do whatever it needs to do in the future. When I have, the big splurges, like, all right, can I justify getting ZBrush now? I'll do a couple more gigs and maybe. Or, ultimately I want to get to the point where I actually hire somebody to work with me. After seeing how artists are taken advantage of, having had similar experiences myself, I feel that it's very important that if I do work with another person, either I have them working under me or if I collaborate with them, unless the pay structure is such that, we both get paid equally, then I want to make sure that I can pay them for their time and their labor.
Right on. I think this is my last question. Wes, do you have anything else?
This is a question we've been asking lately. What does it mean to be bold as an artist, in your view?
I think a good part of it, especially with regard to my own work, is saying and doing the things that feel difficult to say and do. There are some artists out there who are controversial for the sake of being controversial. And I don't know if that's necessarily as beneficial as it could be. And at the same time, there are those artists, and I have been this person, who, play it safe and, don't want to rock the boat, want to make sure that you haven't pissed people off so that you can continue making sales. But I think finding that happy medium to where you are, being bold and saying those things that are uncomfortable, make others uncomfortable, but doing it in such a way that you don't completely alienate I think that's the interesting challenge, and that's the one that I feel like I'm rising to at the moment.
Yeah, I love that answer. That's great.
So what advice would you give people that are listening that want to be full-time artists? Do you have any advice that you could give them?
Learn business. It is a game which nobody is taught the rules, or I should say, a select few are taught the rules. And so for the rest of us who did not learn it in our upbringing, we absolutely need to take it upon ourselves to go out, get educated, figure out how this whole thing works. How do we, not fall into the classic pitfalls of not putting enough money aside for taxes and getting audited, or, having more expenditures than you have income, things of that nature. Go learn the rules of business. You'll hone your craft on your own.
That's great advice.
It is great advice.
And we've heard that more often than not. It's like it's a business. You're being an entrepreneur, and you have to know the rules that aren't necessarily written down. There's books out there that'll tell you about them, but we're not taught those in art school or in college or any of that, a lot of that kind of stuff anyway.
Yeah. And that goes back to that oral history piece, right? And so, we're fed the line of the starving artist very readily. But although those books are out there, not enough people are talking about the books that we even know to look for them.
Right.
I do have one more question for you. So is there anything that you have instituted during the time of COVID, during the pandemic, that you weren't doing before?
Self-care.
Self-care. I love that.
Yeah.
Okay. What's that mean to you?
It means setting boundaries around my time. And so, for example, I'm not answering your email on the weekend. I'm not working on the weekend unless it is a time-sensitive thing. So like, all right, I did work last couple of weekends, but that was because I had a deadline. But then I took yesterday and today off, and I didn't work on anything at all. So, reclaiming my time wherever I can, making sure that I get enough sleep, making sure that I am taking care of myself physically. So eating good food, exercising, all of the things that make us fully functioning human beings that we tend to allow to fall by the wayside, especially when we're in hustle mode. So being very conscientious about that, understanding that, I don't have to take every single opportunity, that some of them I can let go because my schedule is too full, things of that nature.
That's fantastic. If people want to check out your work, where can they find you, both on your website and social media?
So I'm at Afro Triangle on Instagram and Facebook, technically Twitter, but I don't respond there. And then my website is afrotriangledesigns.com. And that's designs with an S on the end. So make sure you put that in. Those are the top two. And then otherwise, I've got a show up at History Colorado until April. So it's on the third floor mezzanine. So if you want to go check that out, see those pieces in real life, or at least the ones that I haven't sold elsewhere, then you can see those.
Ooh, you know what? I had so much fun and it was so educational. Thank you so much. I cannot thank you enough, Adri. I mean, it was just a wonderful experience, and it was exactly what I needed this week. You inspired me and you got me jazzed, and I'm excited to see your work in the future, to meet you in person, hopefully in the future, and maybe swing by Redline sometime and see what you're working on.
Absolutely. I'm here for a while, so you are more than welcome.
And I really love your work. I think the work you're doing with telling the women's story, I think you've chosen some fantastic, and I know it's an endless thing. You could go on, you could focus your entire career on just that and be successful and very educational for everybody everybody needs to hear these stories. So I really appreciate the fact that you're doing that, and you do beautiful work. I love it. I can't wait to come to Denver and see it in person as well. So I'm excited.
All right. Thank you. Again, you're welcome to the studio anytime.
All right.
For the Tenant Podcast, I'm Todd Pearson.
And I'm Wes Brown. Have a great week.